Once upon a time, in a land far away, there was a podcast called Life's Potluck Buffet. And on it, its host, John Paulus, had a lot of things to say about all sorts of topics, like how to make people's day. But today on the podcast was a very special day because John would talk about what are methods for storytelling the Life's Potluck Buffet way. Hey there, thanks for tuning in today. As I mentioned in the intro, our topic today is what are methods for storytelling? And I'm going to use the cards, as always, to give me a prompt and an answer to my question, what are methods for storytelling? And as you know, the cards are infallible when it comes to these kinds of questions. So that's why we use them every day to find out about everything we do in life and work and in the world. And, you know, these cards are just, they're magic. All right, cards. I'm going to start with my usual ritual way of shuffling, as you know. 3 times I move around some cards with my left hand, holding them in the right. And then I back away from the microphone so as to not have the levels blow up. And then I shuffle them in that most stereotypical way that you might think of when you think of shuffling. All right. Then I cut the cards, and I'll ask the question again, what are methods for storytelling? And let's take the top card and see what the cards have in store for us today. It's card 14. If you are in a race against yourself, you can never catch up. Now let's look at this card. Too often we think of ourselves as being caught up in the quote-unquote rat race of life, struggling to keep up. We externalize it as a race against other people or other things. But this race is really against ourselves, and we can simply never win it. Say aloud who you are racing for rather than who or what you are racing against. Now watch yourself crossing the finish line. Oh, that was actually a nice little story from the cards of us running this race and crossing the finish line. That's really nice. So, I think card 14 is a good place to start, of course, because it talks about being in a race against ourselves. So when we're approaching storytelling, the first thing to do is to liberate ourselves from this kind of judgy race in which we're kind of struggling just to keep up with our own demands. And I find that the most helpful way to do that is to just use free talking or free writing if you're writing down a story, free typing. And by that I mean to simply start putting stuff on paper or start putting stuff out there in the air, recording stuff, or start typing. That is a way of writing that I've learned over the years from many great teachers of writing and many great writers. That is a really good way to let your mind free. And that's the getting out of that kind of, the rat race, right? Where you're just kind of spinning your wheels and you can't get going. We talked about that on an episode a few weeks ago as well. That spinning the wheels phenomenon where we can't really get traction. So if you want to get traction, then first start by doing something like putting down whatever comes to mind. It's like answering the Life's Potluck buffet cards. That's storytelling. Whatever comes to mind, start telling that story. Almost every card asks you to do that. So just looking at the Life's Potluck buffet cards is a great start for storytelling, because just whatever comes to mind, start talking about it. And believe me, it will flow. So that's the first thing, is get into that flow by whatever comes to mind, put it down on paper, or type it out, record it. And the reason I say that is because I think the biggest hindrance to storytelling is starting out by being an editor. Do you know this phenomenon? Have you felt this when you've written things or told a story or talked about things where you want it to be in this kind of structured form immediately? And I think a lot of the advice out there, by starting with the idea that you should have a structure in mind or even do an outline, for me, that has never been the practice. I have almost never done an outline in my life. Even if it's a very structured story I'm telling, something I'm writing that requires a lot of structure. And simply because that is not the way for me, and I think for a lot of people out there, to accurately get down what you want to say, or get down what you want to say that's interesting in a way. Sometimes it's a little bit too restrictive, that outline form. So I'm a very big believer in starting with free writing, and I'm in that camp. And there are a lot of people in my camp, and hello to everybody who's in that camp, and to all of the wonderful teachers of writing who have talked about that in the past. Thanks for being in that camp with me. You started the camp. I'm just part of it. So that's tip 1. Card 14 tells us another thing, however. Say aloud who you are racing for, rather than who or what you are racing against. What does that mean for storytelling? That means that storytelling begins with audience. Every card in Life's Potluck buffet talks about people being first. People come first in Life's Potluck buffet's world. And when you're talking about storytelling, the people who come first are the specific audience to whom you're telling the story. So what does that mean? Well, once we have the idea of the story that we are telling, now, ideally, that's a story that you know your audience wants to hear, but we can't always know that. So sometimes we have to start out with stories that we just come up with, like I was just talking about, right? We may not have the data, the research, or the experience to know exactly what our audience wants to hear. So we have to make an educated guess about what the audience wants to hear. Now, understanding what your audience wants and understanding what's working with an audience, that is the critical piece of storytelling that card 14 is emphasizing here. We know that what brings people on board to whatever you're talking about is connecting with them and listening to them, not talking at them. So this is why the audience is so important, because seeing how the audience is responding and what works for them and what doesn't work for them is absolutely critical. So storytelling, not inside this phone booth, inside this box where you don't have anybody. Well, you could be in a phone booth, but someone has to be on the other side of the phone, because storytelling is all about your audience and the audience's reaction. This comes with practice. And that's the third most important thing, which is the kind of encompassing thing for storytelling, is practice. Seeing how your audience reacts. If you're writing something, seeing how your audience reacts to what you're writing, seeing what they respond to. And if you're making videos, seeing what your audience responds to. We know this. And that is something that where your audience is seeing in you doing what you do at your best. When you're telling the stories that your audience connects with, That's you being at your best. And I don't think we think about that too often, because us being at our best, we think about it as a very kind of solitary thing. Like, I feel like, at least I do sometimes, where it's a very interior thing. But when you're at your best, other people see it too. Always. Because it shows. So take those 3 tips, apply them to your storytelling, see what happens. And let me know. Put it in the comments. And if you have any methods for storytelling that you'd like to share, do the same. And I hope you have a great day. And I'll see you next time on Life's Potluck Buffet. And they all lived happily after. No, wait. I got it wrong. And they all lived happily ever after.